gracias por su presencia. Queremos darle la más cordial bienvenida a la Biblioteca Central Universitaria de esta maravillosa institución, la Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla. Tenemos el gusto y privilegio de tener asistentes de diferentes áreas y bueno, vamos a dar comienzo. Hago un pequeño aviso, quienes se registraron en línea, por supuesto, les pedimos que hagan pase de lista en la mesa de registro que está allá atrás, por favor, para que garanticemos la emisión de sus constancias. Entonces, pues bienvenidos, comenzamos en un minuto, por favor. Gracias. Pues bien, damos comienzo este jueves 11 de abril de 2024. La Dirección General de Bibliotecas, sobre todo con la coordinación de la Universidad para Adultos a través de la Coordinación General Académica de esta universidad, promueven este tipo de actividades para acercarles conocimientos muy valiosos sobre la gestión de información. Agradecemos, por supuesto, a la maestra Shenli Chilian Herrera, la coordinadora académica de la UPA, al maestro Alfredo Avendaña Arenaza, director general de Bibliotecas, y por supuesto a nuestras autoridades, al doctor Jaime Vázquez López, vicerrector de docencia, y por supuesto a nuestra rectora, la doctora María Lilia Cedillo Ramírez, quienes nos han otorgado todos los apoyos para que realicemos esta conferencia. Agradezco la presencia del maestro Alfredo Avendaño, quien nos va a acompañar con nuestro ponente. Y bueno, y sin más preámbulo, me voy a permitir leer un breve resumen curricular de nuestro ponente. Estermann es investigador en el campo de la transformación del sector público desde hace más de 15 años, especializándose en aspectos relacionados con datos e infraestructuras, con especial atención a los sectores cultural y patrimonial. Actualmente trabaja para la Academia de las Artes de Berna, en Suiza, donde coordina la implementación de la estrategia de ciencia abierta en esta universidad. Como parte de su compromiso cívico, es miembro de la Junta Directiva de la asociación OpenData.ch y es iniciador de su grupo de trabajo en OpenGLAM, iniciativa de acceso a datos abiertos para galerías, bibliotecas, archivos y museos, promoviendo enfoques participativos en instituciones patrimoniales como la UAP, durante más de 10 años. Y bueno, damos la más cordial bienvenida a Beth Estermann con un fuerte aplauso. Muchas gracias, mi querido Beth, por esta oportunidad.
Thank you very much for these nice words of introduction. And welcome everyone to today's lecture on the digital transformation of the heritage sector and its practical implications. So I will quickly ask the audience who is actually working at a library. There's a few people here, yeah? Who is working for a museum? Okay, also we have a few people. And who is working for an archive? Archivo. A few ones. And sometimes they're connected, huh? Libraries and archives. Okay. And I would like also to thank Sandra Palacios, who will take care of actually moving the slides in Spanish. You will have a Spanish version of the slides, but I'm going to talk in English because that's, I think, much better for all of us. Here a short overview of today's lecture. I'm going to start with the transformation of the public sector in general. So I'm going to discuss how the public sector is changing due to the advent of the internet. And I'm also going to look into what are the current political guidelines in Europe and in Switzerland regarding the implementation of this change of e-government or public sector transformation. Then in the second part of my presentation, I will specifically focus on the digital transformation of the heritage sector. So that's your sector. And I will look at what we call as open GLAM, or in Spanish we call it open BAM, bibliotecas, archivos, museos, as an empirical phenomenon, because I did research on that. Then I will talk about open GLAM as a movement. I've been involved in that also for the past 10 years. We will look into the cooperation of heritage institutions with the Wiki movement, Wikipedia, Wikimedia Commons, Wikidata. And then I will finish with current trends in this open GLAM area. And the last bit of our conversation will be about open GLAM or open BAM at BUAP. I will shortly present what is the current discussion with people at BUAP in this area. And then I would like to really open the stage and also take your questions, and we have a discussion between us, and hopefully also with the director of the libraries at BUAP to kind of open the space a bit. So I'm coming from a little country in Europe, it's called Switzerland. You may have heard about it. Switzerland is politically not part of the European Union, but it's situated in the midst of it, which means that often politically we coordinate a lot of policies with them, but we're not part of the political institutions themselves. So regarding digital transformation of the public sector, I always like to start with a short overview of the different images, ideal images we have of public administration, to actually understand what is actually changing today thanks to the internet. You probably know that guy on the left-hand side. That's the typical bureaucrat. And we had, at the beginning of the 20th century, we had a bureaucratic model of the ideal state. Maybe you have heard about Max Weber. He really described that phenomenon, and there's a lot of things in how public administration works today that are based in this kind of bureaucratic model. Then later on, during the 70s, beginning of the 80s, this bureaucratic model, the welfare state, and so on, they came under pressure, economically mostly, but then also, of course, by the neoliberal movement, and they came up with a new model for public administration, referred to as New Public Management in French, in Spanish, Nueva Gestión Pública. And here the key idea is that we break up the big organizational silos in smaller parts. We introduce market-like mechanism, and we try to get the inspiration for the public sector transformation, if you want, the inspiration from the market and from the private sector. So you have the private sector as a solution to all the problems of the public sector. But now with the advent of the internet, we're in a new phase. Some people call it internet era governance or digital era governance. And I put a big question mark here because we're in the process of being transformed, or hopefully being active part of this transformation. And I'm now going to talk specifically about that question mark on the right-hand side. In the early days when internet appeared, people started to think about how the public sector is going to adapt to that. And they have come up with so-called maturity models. They're used to inform the change and also to think about what is happening. And now, most of you are like familiar with the library environment. So if you picture a library in the 1990s, so probably what they did at first was put up a web presence. Just say, hey, hello world, we exist. Maybe an address, maybe a photo, but probably not much more. Then the second stage would be the interaction stage. That's, for example, when you start putting online your library catalog. But you can still not order anything, you can't download the book content, and so on. Then you get to transaction stage. That's where you can actually do the entire transaction online. Like you go to the catalog, you can order a book, they ship it to your home, or ideally you have access to the digital content directly. So you don't go to the library anymore, you do that from your home or from your office. Then what they also were thinking about is this integration of different online services, or even like from the back end, the databases. In a university library setting, think about integrating all your little libraries out there in the different departments and their databases with one central database. So this is something that happens vertically, but you also have integration horizontally across university libraries in different cities. So you start building these databases that connect all these libraries nationally, internationally, and so on. So these are the 4 stages that come typically up in those e-government maturity models of the first generation. They usually are considering like putting what we have in the analog world into the online world. But there's no radical transformative change. And this transformative change was kind of predicted, anticipated, but in these first generation models, it was very speculative. There was no empirical data about it, what it is. And one guy, or these 2 authors, Kurt and Norris, they actually criticized that a bit, saying, well, this is the e-government nirvana. Everybody has their speculations, but we don't have any hard data. So I wanted to know, and I wanted to know it also specifically with regard to the heritage sector. But let me start with the public sector in general. I went to analyze all these existing maturity models and the way the different authors try to think further ahead into the future and to speculate what will change. So I analyzed all these e-government nirvana ideas, and I also analyzed the different reports of the UN e-government survey. They also have a survey every 2 years, and they also try to identify trends and to anticipate and to give guidelines to governments. So I analyzed it and wanted to know, like, do we actually have this transformation? In what form does it actually show up? And one part of this transformation can be framed as a logic conclusion of this new public management reform. So there's no radical transformation with regard to the neoliberal ideas of the state. We're breaking through organizational silos to have seamless cross-organizational services. We have customer-centered designs of digital public services, and there's some forms of participation that existed beforehand, and we just move it to the digital space. But then there's also a more interesting aspect to the transformation, which I found in these discourses about the future of government. And I termed it as the beginning of the post-managerial era, the meaning like we're after new public management. We're having radically different ideas. So you can boil it down to these 5 phenomena that are listed here. The first one is we move from a citizen, an idea of the citizen as a customer, to a citizen as a prosumer. They are no longer passive consumers of public services, but also co-producers of public services. And we have the phenomenon of online collaboration. Think of Wikipedia, for example. We have the appearance of an encyclopedia that is actually written by everybody who wants to participate. The second phenomenon, government as a platform. Public administration becomes a provider of data and infrastructure services based on which third parties from the public and from the private sector, from civil society can build upon and do further stuff with. Think of open government data. Then we have the idea of open government. That means we're moving away from the bureaucratic idea of a secretive state to kind of make sure that there are no due influences on this state from other parties, to an open government where things should be transparent and citizens should be empowered to actually participate in the activities of the state and help civil society solve societal problems together with the state. So we break up this clear distinction between the state here and citizens over there. The same thing with collaborative governance. There's more and more cooperation between public and private sector players. We're in these mixed arrangements. We have coordination via networks. So that's a big difference regarding new public management, because there we had coordination always via markets. So you try to build little markets inside organizations, or you try to break up players out there to have a market-like setting where you can deal according to private sector rules. So that's a radical change with regard to new public management. And then also the way we think about governments and the private sector. Remember I told you, like, for new public management, the private sector is the big inspiration for change in public administration. Now it's moving back. So we have public administration not only as a service provider, but more and more also the idea of public entrepreneurship as a driver of social change and as a driver of the change of all these infrastructures and government as a platform and others being able to build upon. So that's new and that's quite radical in a way. So together with colleagues, we also looked at political guidelines currently in place in the European Union, but also at the level of the EFTA. Switzerland is part of the EFTA. You don't have to really know the details about that, but just saying that the Tallinn Declaration is valid for European Union countries and a few other countries like Switzerland. And the Tallinn Declaration on e-government that was signed by all these countries in 2017, it gives a common orientation framework for all these countries for the digital transformation of public administration. And what is new about it at the level of the European Union is that we see now digital transformation not only as a coordination issue at the national level, but really at the international level. And they actually committed, all of them committed to the same type of transformation. And we're now going through these 5 pillars or 5 principles that describe this transformation. So first, in order to increase the efficiency and user orientation, the services of public administration should be digital, inclusive, accessible, and barrier-free by default. Then the second, a very radical concept, if you think of your own experiences with public administration, is the so-called once-only principle. So for the services from the public sector, citizens and businesses need to provide the same information to the public administration only once. And then with the agreement of these people, the administration, whenever they need it, will fetch it from the place it's already entered. So I guess that's quite something different compared to what you're currently experiencing with your public administration. And then, of course, public services, as they move to digital, they still need to be trustworthy, they need to be secure, we need infrastructure for that and services for that. And then we have the principle number 4, that's about openness. It's about openness and transparency regarding the data concerning you. So the government should give you access to the data it holds about you and also give a certain level of control over that data, should be transparent. And then there's another type of data which is maybe not personal data, but general data. Let's think about library catalogs and so on. They should be open by default. So anybody can use it for other purposes as they would like. And more, these different databases should be interlinked. So we interlink them to base registers, or from the library field or archival field, you know the concept of authority files, authorities like VIAF and so on. And as you can imagine, especially the archivists among you, when we move to digital by default, we also have to think about long-term digital archiving, because things will not always be on paper in the future as they were in the past. Then the fifth principle is about interoperability and about reusing IT infrastructure and IT services. It's about the government engaging in open source software development, and again, like you have this idea of government as a platform, as an infrastructure provider of infrastructures that others can then build upon. It applies also for IT services. Yeah, and then there's a few accompanying measures. As you can imagine, we need digital skills among the public employees, digital leadership skills among the higher level people. We need also to widen and deepen the use of data and analytics by the government. There's also an idea that we should change the way we innovate, like have faster innovation cycles, innovate more, and in agile ways, which, from my experience, I'd say it challenges especially also heritage institutions who have a DNA that is like, let's keep things as they are, stability, reliability, and then on the other hand, you have IT sections or departments who say, we need to innovate and change, and you have like a whole cascade of change projects which you have to manage. So it's a big challenge, but I think it's something we need to look into. So we then kind of asked ourselves, like, what type of transformation of the public sector does now EU and EFTA go for? And to make it short, we're concluding the new public management reform, but we're also introducing some of the new concepts, but not all of them. And I would say in the area of Open GLAM, we're thinking quite ahead, and we're also kind of moving into the, can you switch the, okay, sorry. The red part here, that's the ones that are not covered by the EU and EFTA strategic documents, but I think in Open GLAM we already move in this area. And now, Open GLAM as an empirical phenomenon, what is transforming here? There were also some ideas of having a maturity model along one dimension. I did some research among heritage institutions in 10 different countries back in 2013-14. And what we found is that these new practices here, how they distribute through the sector, they don't just follow one single line, but there's like 3 different strands of development. One goes from social media use. Social media, you can use it to broadcast, but you can also use it to engage users in a conversation. Social media use, and then to crowdsourcing, collaborative content creation. Then the strand in the middle is about digitizing content, and then opening up content, making it available for reuse on the internet. And then the third strand is metadata. So the first step usually is to centralize the different metadata you have. Maybe some of you can still remember the times where we had the metadata in actually physical catalogs in little drawers. And the first step, obviously, is to put that in one central database. The same for archival finding aids, and so on. And then you can start opening up that data, and then in the next step, you start interlinking that data. like interlinking, for example, your subject references to international databases, or make sure that your authorities about persons and organizations are interlinked with the ones of other countries or other institutions. So I think most of these concepts should be more or less clear. Crowdsourcing is maybe the one that is new. And crowdsourcing refers to situations where an institution proposes to a group of individuals of varying knowledge, heterogeneity, and number via flexible open call, the voluntary undertaking of a task that usually would be performed by staff members. So it's a form of outsourcing, but we're not in the market logic anymore. We outsource to volunteers, to self-appointed experts, if you want. And then we also use the term collaborative content creation as an alternative to refer to crowdsourcing situations where we actually have online collaboration among volunteers, where you don't have a clear institution or that gives a mandate, but they can also give themselves the mandate themselves, huh? Like Wikipedia or Wikimedia Commons, they're kind of self-government communities. But you could still interact with them as an institution, like with a crowdsourcing partner. And now I'm going kind of to switch to the practical approaches of promoting Open GLAM. So that's my activist hat. So actually I started to build up the Open GLAM coordination group in Switzerland in 2012. And we also coordinated at the international level. There were also a few other countries already moving ahead of us. And we came up with a few primary goals and a set of principles. And one of the goals is let's engage global audiences. Like the internet allows us to go where the people are and interact with anybody anywhere in the world, as long as they have access to the internet. We also want to improve the discoverability of all the heritage holdings and interlink all these different collections. Oftentimes you will find that collections that actually would belong together are not sitting in the same institution. And with the internet you can connect them. And we also want to create new possibilities for participation by users or visitors. And the one form of participation we're kind of promoting as an Open GLAM movement or as the Open Data.ch Association are hackathons, data hackathons. And this is an image of the very first such Open GLAM hackathon at the Swiss National Library back in 2015. And such a hackathon is about asking institutions to open up data and inviting people from various backgrounds, like you have researchers, you have heritage specialists, but you also have designers, you have artists, you have Wikipedians. Invite them to work on specific project ideas over 2 days. And so it's short, it's focused, but it opens a space for interaction between people who have completely different experiences and completely different situations in their professional life. And it gives feedback to the institutions who have opened up data, like what could this data or this content be used for? And in what way it has to be presented so that it is useful. So it gives you a feedback loop also as institutions. We also found that it's an excellent place also to just network and to exchange know-how among participants. And then, last but not least, we kind of closely cooperate with the Wikimedia movement to facilitate the reuse of heritage items, their digital representations, and information about them. Here an example of an upload by the Historical Museum in Basel on Wikimedia Commons. And as I mentioned, at the international level, we agreed on a set of principles that are our basis for the Open GLAM movement. And they haven't changed since, so they have been stable over the past 10 years. First one, all the metadata about your heritage holdings should go into the public domain. And you should use a CC0 waiver. That makes this metadata also interoperable with Wikidata, and anybody can kind of use it, interconnect with it. Second, respect the public domain. So if you have holdings that are out of copyright, keep them out of copyright. Don't try to kind of lock them in some way by, for example, 3D photographing and claiming copyright on the photographs. Or in the early days, there were also some institutions that just plainly claimed copyright on digitized material that was already in the public domain. So we're very strict on that. And then number 3, obviously, a lot of your holdings are still under copyright, and you may not control the copyright. You may have stuff that were, like contents that have been produced by artists or by writers. And these writers haven't been dead in Mexico for 10 years, for 100 years yet, so they're still under copyright, so you can't really change that. And in this case, we just ask you, when you publish contents online, make a robust statement, ideally also via a standard copyright license, for example, Creative Commons licenses, to say what people are allowed to do. This is to reduce the transaction costs. So people can just look at the contents and know what they can do with it. They don't have to go and ask you first. So that's the big idea there. Then the 4th one is about technical openness. So when you publish data, use open file formats, so we can interact with it also with machines, and we don't have to have specific software to do so. And the 5th one is about participation. So we should use opportunities to engage audiences in novel ways that are brought about by the internet. So these are our 5 core principles, and I invite you just to endorse them as well as institutions. Then, as I mentioned, an important part in Open GLAM is the cooperation between that big movement of open content and open text production, that is Wikipedia. Wikipedia and its media repository, Wikimedia Commons, and over the past 10 years also the repository for structured data in this kind of ecosystem, which is Wikidata. I have been involved in GLAM Wiki cooperation also since more or less the outset. There were like 2 generations, I would say, of cooperation projects. Since 2008, we have official partnerships between the Wikimedia movement and heritage institutions that are geared towards providing content for those Wikimedia projects, or by the means of those Wikimedia projects. And one of the key proponents of GLAM Wiki cooperation is Liam Wyatt. He was also the first Wikipedian in residence worldwide, and he stated back, I think in 2011, we are doing the same thing for the same reason, for the same people in the same medium, meaning on the internet. Let's do it together. So that's an invitation to heritage institutions to closely cooperate with the Wikimedia movement. And since about 2020, we're seeing what I call second generation online collaboration projects. And that come from a goal that has been enshrined in the Wikimedia movement strategy for 2013. And it's called knowledge as a service. So the Wikimedia movement does not only want to get your content and your data and kind of add this to their own platforms, but they want to become a service provider for partners like heritage institutions to make a better job, to kind of live up to their missions. So it's kind of this, before it was like outward in perspective, and now it's more inward out perspective. So some examples of early GLAM wiki cooperation would include, like at the British Museum, so-called Wikipedian in residence. So somebody goes there and works within the institution, informs the staff about the Wikimedia movement, teaches about this kind of stuff. And they also set up challenges and prizes for good articles and so on. They had a school translation project with French students. And what is also always interesting is if you can establish a direct contact with, between curators and Wikimedians who are interested in a particular topic of yours, and then have a direct dialogue. So Wikipedians actually get direct access to the information held by the heritage institution. And this is also the idea of the so-called backstage pass. And at the British Library, they also organized the so-called editathon. This is when you identify a few interesting topics and invite Wikipedians to edit articles about these topics. Or you can take it a step further and say, okay, we want curators themselves to edit Wikipedia. So by providing your information as a heritage institution online on Wikipedia, you make it accessible to a wider audience in the world, because Wikipedia is number 5 of the best visited websites in the world. And you as an institution usually don't beat that with your own websites. Not even national broadcasters beat that. There's just Google, the Googles, the YouTubes, and the Microsofts of this world that are at this top, and then you have Wikipedia. And now some examples for later projects that are going more in the area of collaboration on Wikidata. Back in 2019, I organized a Wikidata for Libraries Hack Day series, and these libraries actually worked on Wikidata, how to provide archival data on Wikidata and how to make it queryable through library discovery systems. There's also a link data for Wikidata affinity group in North America. So those of you who speak English, I would just encourage you to join it. I think it's driven by the Stanford University Library. They have regular calls and they exchange about how these libraries are using Wikidata for their purposes. Now, trending topics. And I think I need to speed up a bit, otherwise we run out of time for the question and answer session. Trending topics is a big slide, like laying out all these topics in green that came up over the past 5 years or so. So on the left-hand side, you see the whole stuff around algorithms. Algorithms with machine learning, with human-machine interaction, algorithms used to enhance metadata, and so on. Then in the middle, you have the connection between crowdsourcing and linked data, and that's Wikidata. And then also with regard to Wikimedia Commons, we have structured data on Wikimedia Commons since a few years. And on the right-hand side, that's also an important novelty. We have new ethical considerations in addition to just opening up. So we're starting to think, how do we deal with content that came from problematic contexts? Think of colonization, but anything else that is based on an unequal power relationship is problematic. And then we're currently moving in the direction of thematic data ecosystems, thinking about global digital public goods. And when it comes to sharing of sensitive data, we're talking about trustworthy data spaces. And now just a few examples. On Wikimedia Commons, there's a tool for the tagging of images on Wikimedia Commons. And this tool is used to set up crowdsourcing campaigns. Tool looks like that. We don't have the time now to go into the details. So what we're now working on is enhancing this tool with machine learning and algorithms. So it actually gives suggestions to the users what kind of tags they should add. And we have two types of algorithms. One is the so-called metadata to concept module. We try to exploit the existing metadata to suggest tags that are linked to Wikidata. So we interlink these tags directly also to Wikidata. So we're creating linked open data around this image metadata. And the other tool that's currently turned off, but was on for a while, was Google Cloud Vision. So we tried to extract this metadata directly from analyzing the images. There's still ongoing work on that, and there's also a big discussion in what way the tools actually create biases that are wanted or unwanted by the community. Then I was going to say a few words about thematic data ecosystems, because this brings us back to the beginning of my talk when we talked about maturity models. Nowadays, to kind of lead the transformation, we're using less these maturity models and more so-called ecosystem thinking as a metaphor. And it has the advantage that it accounts for the interdependency of social, technological, and information systems. And it stresses the fact that these are interlinked and they don't always behave the way we anticipate, so we have to see how things actually move into place. So we're really in this transformative phase with a lot of factors and variables changing. So for that we use this ecosystem metaphor. And I did an analysis of the literature 2 years back. What are the key aspects of thematic data ecosystems? I won't go into the details, but these are the four big categories you should keep in mind. One is data sharing, then interoperability and shared infrastructures, then the involvement of all the important stakeholders, and last but not least, economic sustainability. So whatever you do as an institution, you have to think about, is this sustainable in the way you're doing it over a longer period of time? And it's a very important step also in the learning processes. And when you're experimenting with something, maybe you're excited at the beginning, but then you have to really be hard with yourself and see, is this going forward? Is this scalable? Can we actually pay for it? Can we afford it over a longer period of time? Or how do we need to change our ways of functioning to make it work? And we're also seeing that these ecosystems are now interrelated. We have the heritage sector interacting more and more with the cultural sector itself, interacting more and more with public administration. Then you have the research and digital humanities fields. They're all kind of growing into interconnected data ecosystems. And now something that is probably also relevant for you in Mexico, because you have a lot of local ethnical communities. And a few years ago, a group called Global Indigenous Data Alliance came up with the so-called CARE principles. So with open data and open access and open research data, we had the FAIR principle. So data needs to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And now we have the CARE principles for collective benefit. So if you take material from, let's say, a community somewhere in the province of Mexico, you should think about how you use this in the benefit also of this community and not just appropriate it. Then you should give the people concerned authority to control. And ideally, you give them also access to the discourses you're having on this material. And then there's the aspect of responsibility and ethics. So, like, we're now really getting into this field where we're restating ethical questions and not just abiding by the legal tools we have had so far. So, an example. Last fall, we did our first cultural hackathon in cooperation with the Ethnographic Museum. It was the Ethnographic Museum in Geneva. And here, the director said at some point, when we're talking about open data, in the context of our ethnographic collections, which are like concerning like all kinds of places in the world, they don't want just open it up as open data and give it free for everybody, but they want to involve these local communities and think about where traditional indigenous knowledge comes in. And there are tools for that. It is local contexts movement, and they have now also like reflections on how to interact with indigenous communities, and also to declare as an institution what you're doing in this area. And I would just invite you to have a look if you're concerned via your own holdings. And then we have this idea of global digital public goods. Digital public goods are open source software, open data, open AI models, open standards, and open content that adhere to privacy laws and to other applicable laws and best practices, do no harm by design, and help to attain the sustainable development goals. There's also a movement behind that. And the key idea is that we start developing software for the public sector, starting not from or with the requirements of developed countries, Western countries, but we start with the requirements in the poor countries, where the infrastructure in which it's embedded in is different. And then we open the source code and make it available so anybody can reuse it. And then if some richer countries want to develop stuff on top of that, they're free to do so. But we just turn it upside down compared to what is currently happening, right? And this vision of digital public goods in the service of digital self-determination for individuals, but also in the service of digital sovereignty by countries, and in the service of sustainable development, I think is an ideal basis for international cooperation. And they're in line with the Tallinn principles, which we have seen of the EU and EFTA. Because in the area of data, we look for once only, open by default, semantic interoperability, and interlinking with reference databases and base registers. So just move to the open and linked space with this data. In the area of applications, we have the call for interoperability by default, and also this idea of making ICT solutions developed by the state available for reuse by using open source licenses. And then the idea of avoiding sectoral duplication of service infrastructures, which in the end means that states have to work together to develop this software and make it available as a common infrastructural good. And then in the area of e-government services, this digital public goods idea incorporates, of course, the idea of trustworthiness and security and protection of privacy, and on the other hand, the ideas of inclusiveness and accessibility. So now I'm coming to the interesting part. What are we doing now with Open GLAM at BUAP? And I have been invited as a visiting scholar to kind of start these conversations with people here. And this is what we are working on currently. Like the stuff in green is kind of already happening. So we had a seminar at ARPA on the digital transformation of the heritage sector, together with Sandra Palacios, who is my primary interlocutor in Puebla. And we are also implementing a new methodology. I'll talk a bit further on that on the next slide, where we interact with the Swiss GLAM Hackathon, with ethnographic museums in Switzerland, but also with students here in Puebla, and have them kind of create common projects. So this green stuff is already on the way. Then the orange part we are currently discussing, especially with Hector Diaz-Furlong, but also with Marco Serrano and the CCO libraries. How do we actually set up an Open GLAM program for the state of Puebla? And the idea is also to organize a GLAM hackathon next year here at BUAP. And then a logical continuation of our activities now we're having with Sandra Palacios is to integrate this open GLAM content into curricula, both at ARPA and UPA. Currently we do that outside the curricula, and we do it on a volunteer basis, and this is coming back to the sustainability question. It is not sustainable, as you can imagine. So it has to go deeper into the DNA of these institutions. And this culture flow is also it's a kickboard for international cooperation projects, which we're trying to explore over the coming months. So a few words about culture flow. Culture flow is a methodology that has been developed to extend the traditional GLAM hack approach used in Switzerland, Austria, and elsewhere. And it is specifically designed to encourage and facilitate public participation and artistic creation around the themes covered by GLAM hackathons. And good news, BUAP is our pilot partner for that. So you're innovating here in the area of GLAM hackathons in a way which we haven't seen so far elsewhere. So I think that's an interesting opportunity, and it's a way also how ARPA and UPA could position themselves at the international level. The whole thing is connected with the GLAM hackathon in Lucerne that will take place in next September, and it's the 10 years Jubilee edition. So we're doing it for the 10th year, and we're happy to also feed our experiences and our know-how into your processes in institutions here. So we're engaging ethnographic museums in Switzerland, and we have students' projects here. Currently we have 3 projects in focus, or ideas so far. One is about different perspectives on the Habsburg. We found that between Austria, Switzerland, and Mexico, we have one thing in common, that's the Habsburg. And we would like to set up a website and installations at Habsburg memory sites. The second one is providing pluralist views on artifacts in ethnographic collections. These views, perspectives can be artistic, they can be participatory, for example, by involving the communities concerned by these artifacts. And here we have already one offer from one institution in Switzerland to actually put these contributions in their exhibition and on their website. But we would like to kind of open it up and a bit also to do it for other institutions in the same way. So that's the idea there. And the third one is like improved access to Mesoamerican collections worldwide. I think BUAP is well placed to take an active role on that. We have some strong partners in Switzerland, and we're trying to get at the Weltmuseum, that's the one that has the head, what is it called? Penacho. Yeah, the headdress, the only one remaining. Yeah, so we're working on interesting collections here. And now, sorry for taking too much space for my presentation, but we have arrived to the Q&A section, reflections on next steps. And ahora la pelota está en su cancha. And I really invite you to...
Bert, muchas gracias. Pues a aprovechar la oportunidad. ¿Tienen alguna pregunta? Yo sé que fue toda la conferencia en inglés. Esperemos que el refuerzo de las diapositivas les haya dado mucho más visión de lo que se está platicando. Fuerte aplauso entonces otra vez para Bert Estermann. Si alguien tiene una pregunta, por favor, les vamos a pasar el micrófono. Nos acompaña Debbie. Debbie nos va a ayudar con alguna traducción si fuera necesario para que, si ustedes han tenido una pregunta. Mira, por allá tenemos una primera pregunta, si son tan amables. Y luego seguimos de este lado.
Hola. Bueno.
Ahí está.
Listo. Thank you. It's so amazing. And I have 2 questions, maybe 3. First, what do you think of the possible use of TikTok in Editathon from a copyright perspective to attract audiences? Second, what is your opinion on the dissemination of artistic creation of our indigenous community not declared in a legal issue of copyright? And the third, can I get your slides?
The slides are on SlideShare.
Presentation.
They're on SlideShare. Just look for Beat Estermann,
the
SlideShare, and
presentation.
they're available there. Yeah.
Can I get the presentation? Oh, your presentation.
Debbie, por favor, si nos ayudas.
Yes, sin problema.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Regarding your TikTok question, so you're asking whether heritage institutions should be on TikTok? I think you should try to use all kinds of social media and go where the people are. But of course, I think heritage institutions need to be respectful of copyright. So that's also what we stand for as an Open GLAM movement. You should analyze your copyright situations and be clear about it, whether something is in the public domain, or if it's in copyright, you should clarify whether you have the control over the copyright and can do whatever you want because you have the contracts, or whether this content is under copyright and in the property and the ownership of somebody else. And of course, the last category you should not use on TikTok. But the others, why not? And engage audiences in all kinds of ways. And also invite people to reuse your content. Then the second question about artistic creation among ethnic minority groups. I don't think I'm the right person to answer this question. I know that the situations are very different from one setting to the other. People have completely discrepant views on that. I know from examples where you have artists from these communities who want to have access to do their own artistic stuff, and at the same time you may have more traditional and conservative views of community representatives who say, we don't want to just go and share. And I think you can have all kinds of settings. And you should also, I think the key here is you should be aware of power differentials today, especially concerning communities that are at risk today and that are not well with the central government, for example. And we see that, I don't think in relation to the ethnographic collections in Switzerland about Mexico, this is a huge problem because it's a lot of really old stuff, archaeological heritage. But when we talk about Africa, for example, we have artifacts and specimens, partly human specimens, that were extracted in the 1950s, 1960s. These, the children of these people are still alive, and there's still a memory within these communities regarding the way the colonialists arrived and interacted. Now in Mexico, I think you really have to ask this question, as Mexicans within Mexico, how does your central government, how does Mexico relate to these various ethnic groups? And how is the power relationship there? And be aware of that and respectful of that.
Ok, por aquí hay otra pregunta. Le vamos a pedir a Debbie si es así como que necesario hacer la traducción.
Bueno, es una pregunta y reflexión. Sí, en México hace mucha falta la digitalización. Estamos muy verdes en México, o sea, estamos muy en pañales. La digitalización de información. Estamos muy básicos para la digitalización, pero creo que no se está viendo la perspectiva, como lo mencionabas, en el sector privado. No hay ese apoyo o correlación para que se apoye el sector privado al gobierno, o tal vez el gobierno no lo quiere implementar y está yendo muy lento en la digitalización de la información. Hay páginas del gobierno que mencionan que tienen bibliotecas o mencionan que tienen información o artículos. Sin embargo, la capacidad que tienen para ingresar nueva información es mínima. Entonces, incluso los catálogos de algunas, por ejemplo, del ayuntamiento o del gobierno, los catálogos son PDFs, son digitales, o más bien se digitalizan de documentos impresos. En la web, bueno, los catálogos, bien lo mencionabas, son digitales. Cualquier persona de la comunidad web puede ingresar a los catálogos, revisar el material, todos los libros con los metadatos que mencionabas. Y creo que le hace falta eso al gobierno, tener una mentalidad de un sector privado para poder alcanzar, pues bueno, impactar en la población y tener más información. Información de que para el público podría ser fundamental encontrarla en estas páginas, ¿no? Y además, hablando de transparencia, hace mucha falta que, además de estas plataformas digitales, sea más fácil para la gente, sea accesible, sea pues para toda la gente, ¿no? Para la gente que tiene problemas visuales, de oído, bueno, que tengan diferentes tipos de medios para que se puedan informar. Bueno, creo que no era pregunta, es mi reflexión, pero bueno, la pregunta quizá vaya enfocada a ¿qué tanta información debe compartir el gobierno de que sea pública y colaborativa? O sea, ¿hasta dónde llega la colaboración de sectores privados o de los ciudadanos con respecto a datos del gobierno? ¿Serían datos propios del ciudadano, propios de los, no sé, de comunidades indígenas, en cuestiones de datos de población, datos, no sé, culturales? Pero ¿hasta dónde puede meter mano o qué política podría ser funcional para que pudiera haber esta colaboración? Porque bueno, se pueden mentir datos, se pueden maquillar, pero ¿hasta dónde se puede colaborar los ciudadanos con el gobierno? Esa es como mi pregunta.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So, when talking about classical public administration, not talking about the heritage sector, I think the first step is to have a clear open government data policy and to focus first on the data that is not sensitive in any way, but has a reuse potential. And already with that, I mean, in Switzerland, it kept us busy for 10 years. You have a lot to do there. And then you can organize hackathons and invite the private sector to come up with idea how to reuse this data and have a dialogue between data providers and data users. Now in the second step, you have to think about how you deal with sensitive data, with privacy protection issues, with business secrets, but also copyright. How do we approach this? And here, there are several reflections. One is to give the individuals more power over their own data and to allow them, for example, to share their data with other parties. But the control is with the concerned individuals and companies, not with the government. The government cannot just walk around and share all the private data with any private sector actors. It's a no-go. Even between government departments, sharing of data is not just automatic. It should not be. There's a good reason we have bureaucratic closures and silos. Like, for example, we don't want the police department to access the school records to find illegal immigrants, because these children have a right to education. And this right is higher or more important than being able to identify all the illegal immigrants in the country. Just to give you an example, so there's a good reason to keep things closed and locked up, but we can leverage this by giving people, the concerned people, control over their data and also the control to share it with other parties. Then at the technical level, what is now being worked on is so-called trustworthy data spaces. So arrangements, infrastructural arrangements, but also legal arrangements within which different partners can share sensitive data. For example, for medical research, but maybe also we're currently thinking about how we approach this issue when you have people in wheelchairs or with other handicaps. when we connect their preferences with preferences about public events they would like to attend, and having recommendation systems, how do we actually expose those profiles, these preference profiles? Are we making it possible to be shared across different services and so on? So there's a lot of reflections on that. And as you can imagine, this once only principle that this talent declaration calls for is a tricky one to implement. So you also have to create these data spaces where you have mechanisms to exchange data but still respect privacy and give individuals, in the sense of digital self-determination, the control at what moment I share what with whom. Does this answer your questions? Thank you.
Tenemos una última pregunta, si son tan amables.
Congratulations, Mr. Bit. I'm a PhD student here in Guam. I'm working in a cultural mapping methodology for extract knowledge in a community or a neighborhood here in Puebla. I is a specialist. The problem is not the technology. I think the problem is how to involve the participation between societies. Because here, I don't know, in Mexico or here in Puebla, it's very difficult that people participate in these type of initiatives. Because maybe there are no interests, maybe you need a good motivated society for these type of initiatives. In your expertise, what is the point of how to motivate societies or small groups? Because there are, in your slides, you show a hackathon. Obviously, hackathon, they participate young people. How to motivate old people, because they are a lot of knowledge in their minds. How motivate this type of sector, or this type of all people? How motivate all kinds of age?
Yeah, thank you for this question. What you typically see in crowdsourcing projects or participation projects is a pyramidal structure of participation. So you have 1% of the people who contribute 80% of inputs. That's a fact, you won't change that. And then you have the long tail of participants that may be valuable because they contribute some very specific things. And I think when trying to motivate people, you can try to cater for the first group and for the second group. And what we found in crowdsourcing projects is also like institutions who want to engage with the audience and get the inputs, they also have to put resources themselves and get engaged and become part of the community. And often what we see, or the way I think with my partners and customers about getting involved in, for example, in the Wikimedia movement, is these institutions are part of the movement. And it's not just we're waiting for the others to contribute, it's also like we think how we can contribute to a larger data ecosystem. And then do a few first steps and invite other institutions to do the same. And you will find that here and there, volunteers will pop up and also contribute their stuff. And you also get a huge advantage by using Wikidata or Wikimedia Commons, because you don't have to create this infrastructure yourself. It's already there. You can go and use it from today. And I think this shift in the mindset of public administration or heritage institutions, of not being just employees of one silo structure, of one hierarchy, but being part of a larger network, of a larger community with shared values. I think this shift in mindset is key. And then it will become much easier to interact with outside partners, be there like individuals, groups you'd like to mobilize, but just simply using synergies with your peers in other organizations. I don't know whether that responds or answers your question regarding the specific issue with the local community. I don't know whether you want to elaborate on that.
I'm working, my project is motivate people for share knowledge, thoughts, immaterial heritage.
Mm-hmm.
This type that they share, this type of in cards. After my work is translated in a web mapping platform.
Yeah. Are you, like, immaterial heritage, you're talking? Are you aware that there's an international project on that, led by the Finnish partners of OpenGlam?
I am the fourth semester. I'm working I have done one cultural mapping.
Mm-hmm.
I am planning my second cultural mapping maybe in May for more extractive knowledge. And after this, I'm going to publish in a web.
Yeah, let's discuss bilaterally after this, after the session, because there's an international initiative to do exactly that, in connection with Wikimedia projects.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Pues muchas gracias, Beth. Gracias por la excelente charla. Yo te quiero comentar y quiero compartir que la colaboración es el principal eje que va a sustentar la productividad de las instituciones. Te quiero mencionar un esfuerzo en la cual la universidad está inmersa, concretamente las bibliotecas universitarias, que es un esfuerzo de América Latina, que es la red de bibliotecas universitarias de América Latina y el Caribe. Es de la red BAL, es una que pertenece a la UDUAL, que es la organización o la Unión de Universidades de América Latina. En ese esfuerzo tenemos un catálogo integrado de cerca de 40 instituciones en América Latina, 40, a través de una solución tecnológica. Este esfuerzo lo pueden ver en la página de Bibliotecas, que a través de un solo proceso de búsqueda se hace la búsqueda en las 40 instituciones. El gran reto de este año es sumar los repositorios. Hay muchos repositorios maravillosos de comunidades, por ejemplo, de indígenas, de insectos, de enfermedades, que nos pueden vincular a través de este maravilloso esfuerzo o catálogo integrado. Eso ya lo tenemos y es una realidad. Es parte de la colaboración que se debe hacer para hacer sustentable cualquier institución. Pero otro de los grandes esfuerzos, y que lo vamos a hacer posible el siguiente año, para de alguna manera ser solidaria y responsable como institución, y por supuesto tener la incidencia para que los gobiernos puedan aperturar más sus datos, porque estamos en un momento, sobre todo en América Latina, que los datos ya no están aperturando, que ya no son visibles esos datos que hace 4 o 5 años tenían mucha visibilidad. Pero las instituciones como nosotros debemos primero, el primer gran esfuerzo es unir la parte de archivos, bibliotecas, museos, y hacer un solo canal de búsqueda. Esto lo vamos a lograr el siguiente año a través de una herramienta tecnológica que ya vamos a tener dentro de Bibliotecas, y obviamente el principal afán de Bibliotecas WAP es la colaboración, pero primero la colaboración entre la propia institución, tener elementos identificables a través de metadatos, trazabilidad, interoperabilidad, y con esto podemos vincularnos a otros ecosistemas y a un movimiento GAM. Entonces, celebro mucho tu charla, porque siempre hacemos eco que la colaboración es el eje que debe mover como responsabilidad social a todas las instituciones de este país, y si lo hacemos unidos, el esfuerzo seguramente va a tener muchos frutos, pero sobre todo vamos a tener esa información pertinente y actual.
Thank you very much for this comment. I think it's one point in your comment calls for some reflection. It's like when you try to integrate all the different services inside your organization, is the best way to try integrating first inside BWAP, or are you going the way around? You integrate with the world, and automatically your services will be integrated, like the databases. So think act global, I think in the digital world has some value.
Sí, lo primero es integrarnos nosotros como una organización y poder después compartir este esfuerzo de integración a las demás organizaciones. Hay un ejemplo aquí en México, y yo siempre lo señalo, es el Colegio de México. El Colegio de México ha integrado este maravilloso esfuerzo y donde la biblioteca es un eje sustantivo de colaboración. Entonces, lo primero debemos hacerlo de manera local para poder salir.
And are you thinking of cooperating with Wikidata or Wikimedia Commons?
Sí, se coopera a través de la Wikipedia y a través de hackatones y de tatones.
Okay, so I'm really looking forward to seeing like the progress over the coming years. Yeah. Thanks a lot, and thanks for having me here. And I think we're kind of coming to the official end.
Pues muchísimas gracias, Beth. Thank you very much for your presence here, and definitely we appreciate all your knowledge that you shared with us in this afternoon. A todos ustedes, muchísimas gracias. No pierdo la oportunidad de dejarle al maestro Alfredo Avendaño Arenaza un reconocimiento para nuestro conferencista. Un aplauso, por favor. La verdad es que hemos aprendido mucho de este esquema de participación. Las condiciones no fueron las óptimas, lo sabemos. Vamos a procurar otros momentos y otros horarios para que el sol, por ejemplo, no nos toque. Apreciamos a todos ustedes. Recuerden, vamos a seguir haciendo esfuerzos desde la UPA y desde la Dirección General de Bibliotecas para que ustedes sigan teniendo esta... Me encanta la última frase que dice, pensemos global, actuemos global. Entonces, pues este conocimiento venga para todos ustedes y el ejercicio muy bueno. Apreciamos que cada uno de ustedes tuvo la paciencia de estar leyendo. No nos enfocamos mucho en la traducción, una disculpa por eso. Lo debemos de decir, nos disculpamos por la traducción, no tuvimos la capacidad económica básicamente de tener una traducción simultánea, sin embargo creemos que cada uno de ustedes hizo un gran esfuerzo por entender esta conferencia y eso lo apreciamos y sobre todo valoramos para nuestras propias habilidades. Debbie, muchas gracias, Abin, por el apoyo. Maestro Alfredo, muchas gracias. Bit, Sandy, querida, muchísimas gracias. Un aplauso a todos ustedes, que tengan excelente tarde.